Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to InterExchange's Career Guidance webinar. Today's topic is creating successful resumes and cover letters. My name is Tammin Nicholson. I'm the Program Manager for the Career Training USA program here at InterExchange. For those of you who are unfamiliar with InterExchange, welcome. We are a cultural exchange organization based in New York City, and we work with young professionals and students to help them engage in international experiences in the United States and overseas. The Career Training USA program specifically helps young professionals and students who are seeking internships and traineeships in the United States. We assist with J-1 visa paperwork, and then also once the internship or traineeship starts, we work with students and young professionals who are here to guide them in their experience in the US, assist in any emergency situations, and so on. So with the pandemic, there's been a decrease in international internships, and currently there are a little less opportunities than there typically would be during the summer. So we wanted to shift and create some webinars and other tools that will be useful for interns and trainees as they begin looking for internships and experiences once things slowly start to return to normal in places in the United States. We also know right now there are less networking opportunities, so your resume and your cover letter probably will be the first interaction you have with any potential host employer. So we want to make sure that we can assist you and help you to get the tools to make your resume and cover letter a successful first impression as you submit it. So just going through the outline of today's session, we're going to talk about the purposes and uses of a resume, and then we'll talk about some different resume types, tips for resume creation, and then in the second half of the presentation, we'll move over to cover letters, and we'll talk about the purposes of a cover letter, various formats, again, some tips to create successful cover letters. We will have a question and answer at the end, but we have built in some pauses throughout this session to stop and make sure that we answer any relevant questions. So if you do have a question, please type it into the chat box. I'm here with my colleague Fatima, who will read off any questions as they come in each of those pauses. So without further ado, we'll start the presentation and start talking about resumes. And we felt that the best place to begin was just a resume 101 slide to talk about what is a resume. In most of the world, a resume and a CV are synonyms. In the United States, a resume is a bit different than a CV. A resume is a one-page summary, typically one page, of your work experience and relevant background to the job that you're applying for, where a CV is going to be a bit longer. It's more of an academic diary. It includes all of your experience, your certificates, publications that you've maybe done. It's typically used in the field of academia, where a resume is going to be more relevant for nearly all of the interns or trainees who might be applying for an international experience through InterExchange and the Career Training USA program. A resume is typically your introduction to the employer. It showcases a summary of skills and abilities that you have. It talks about your education, your professional history, any certifications that might be relevant to the job or internship that you're applying for. And again, summary is the key word here. Most hiring managers look at a resume for less than 30 seconds on average, so you want to make sure that your resume stands out and it has the important information that you want a hiring manager to see first and foremost when you do submit your application to them. There are typically two uses of a resume. I think today we will mostly focus on the first use, which is applying for a job or applying for an internship, but your resume is also an important tool for networking. If someone has an opening in their company, or if a friend knows of someone who has an opening, or there's possible opportunities to find an internship, having your resume on hand and having it ready to send is a really important tool to build virtual networks. Someone might ask, hey, can I see what your resume is, so that they know if it even makes sense to forward on your contact details. And for that reason, it's important to keep your resume fresh. Make sure that it's up to date. It includes the most recent aspects of your professional history and your education. So you probably want to update it maybe 3 times a year to make sure that it is relevant and it is correct. It's a lot easier to have your resume ready to go and send it off than at the last minute trying to make any updates that have happened over the last 2 years. So even if you're not looking for an internship or you're not looking for a new opportunity, make sure you go back and you keep your resume up to date. I also want to highlight what should not be on a resume. And the scope of this presentation, again, is internships and traineeships in the United States. So this is a bit of a cultural difference. Some countries it might be appropriate to put some of these details on a resume, but in the scope of the United States, you wouldn't want to put your picture, your birth date, whether or not you're married, your gender, your religion. Really any unnecessary personal information should be excluded from your resume. If it's not relevant to you as a candidate, you don't need to include that information. And an employer shouldn't be asking for that information. It's typically not allowed because of hiring laws and discrimination laws for hiring. So putting this on your resume might actually exclude you from being moved on to whoever the person hiring might be. It might be seconded out by a screener. So really your resume should just be the details that relate to your experience and this position and nothing necessarily personal. We're gonna move next into the different types of resumes, but I think we had some questions come in as we went through the resume 101. So I want to just pause and toss it over to Fatima. Fatima, did we have any questions so far about US resumes?
Yes, so far that we have 2 questions. The first question is, what if I can't get my resume under 2 pages? And the second question is, what is the best file format for a resume?
Sure. So if you can't get your resume under 2 pages, I would recommend that you give your resume to someone else to look at and see if they can help you to cut down some of the details that might not be relevant. At a certain point in your career, it might make sense to have a 2-page resume, but I think anyone who's still in university or just graduated, a 1-page resume is going to be really what you're going to submit, and that's going to have the most important details that a hiring manager is going to want to look at. So I would encourage you, if you can't get your resume down under 2 pages, to ask someone else to do it for you, to make sure that you have a second pair of eyes that can look at your resume and decide maybe you're adding a little bit too much information in this component, or maybe you can cut down on your education and you don't need to list all of your courses and things like that. And then the other question about a file format, I would look at the posting first and see if there is any recommendations in the posting about how they would like to receive your resume. But if there's not, my recommendation would be to use a PDF. And we'll talk about application screening software later in this presentation, but a PDF is great because it can't necessarily be edited or moved around, where the screening software might have trouble recognizing what is your education experience and what is your summary. So if there's no information posted in the job itself on how you should apply, I would recommend a PDF file format. Great, so the different types of resumes that we are going to talk about today, there's 3 main types of resumes: chronological, functional, and hybrid. Chronological is the most common. It's probably the best choice depending on the internship that you're applying for, but look at the vibe of the company. Think about your own experience as we talk through these 3 different versions of a resume, and think if maybe a less traditional or more creative style would resonate best for you. So there are definitely a few different ways you can present your resume. Chronological is the best for most people, but not necessarily everyone. So with that, we'll dive into an example of a chronological resume. And this probably looks pretty familiar to most people. It's very easy to read. It's targeted to different positions that you might be applying for and related responsibilities, and it is segmented into different areas. So the top is the contact information, And that would be where you would put your email address, your phone number. You can put your LinkedIn profile here. Any way that would make sense for a potential host employer to get in contact with you. Don't hide this information. Make sure it's at the top. If you want to make it in a little bit of a bigger font, that's fine as well. And then you move into the summary, which talks a little bit about you as a candidate. It's typically about 3 or 4 lines. In this example, the summary is in bullet form. You can do that in paragraph form or in sentence form, but really no longer than 3 or 4 lines. Just a quick snapshot of who you are as a candidate. And then you move into the education, and then next year, your work and internship or any professional experiences. Those 2 sections are done in reverse chronological order. And there's a lot of equity in this example, but depending on how long you've been out of school for, you might see the experience section being much longer than the education section. So anytime you add something to your resume, you think about what you might want to take off to keep your resume at 1 page. Like I said, at a certain point, a 2-page resume might make sense, but early on in your career, really keep it to 1 page if possible. And then at the bottom of your resume, that's when you can add any volunteer work, community involvement, anything external from your professional experience that you think might be important to note for you as a candidate. So that's pretty much the chronological resume in a nutshell. We'll move next to the functional resume, which looks a little bit similar, but there's some very important differences. So at the top, again, we have your contact information, and then we move into a summary, which is a bit longer. This is a 5-line summary and also pulls out some specific skill sets that might be relevant to the position that this candidate is applying for. And those are italicized, they're bolded, they're bulleted, so they really jump out on the resume. And then we see the education section, which is a lot more concise than in the chronological resume. It just kind of lists out education and moves on from there. And then the skill summary section is totally different than what we saw in the last one as far as experience. This groups the different skills that the candidate has into different umbrellas, and maybe it pulls from different experiences. So some of these bullets might be from internship experience, some might be from schoolwork, some might be from volunteer experience, but they might all fall under leadership skills or interpersonal skills or organizational planning. So this type of resume is best if you have large gaps in your resume, or if you've shifted dramatically between positions, or if maybe what your past history, your past work history, or your education, if it doesn't necessarily translate obviously to why you're applying for this job, you might opt to do a functional resume and show, I have leadership skills, I have interpersonal skills, I have organization and planning skills, I have all of the skills that this job posting is asking for. I think it's also very important in a functional resume to quantify some of these skills. If you have leadership skills, you should figure out a way to quantify maybe how many people you've led or how many teams you've led, or different events and sizes and scope too, because sometimes when we talk about these skills, if they're not technical skills, it might be difficult for a host employer to understand exactly how they translate to this position, even if they absolutely do, and you do. You just want to make sure that you're able to articulate that in the skill summary section. And then here at the bottom is the work history. So you still do include your work history, but you don't go into detail about what you did at each of those past positions. You just list what they were and you list the dates. You can certainly expand upon them maybe in your cover letter, which we'll talk about later, hopefully in the interview once you get a chance to actually get in the door and interview with the company. But here in the functional resume, you're going to focus on the skills more so than the actual positions that you held. The third resume version is the hybrid resume. So the hybrid resume is just that. It's a mix of the two. It starts with a summary section at the top, and the summary section again is about 4 lines, but does include some specific skills that are pulled out and highlighted to the host employer. But then after the summary section, we move into the education and the experience, very similar to a chronological version, where they go in reverse chronological order. The bullets in the experience section pull out some specific experiences that the candidate did in their time as a paralegal or as a legal secretary. So you have components from both of those past versions that we looked at, and this is great for someone who has a little bit of professional experience that might be related to the position, but not a whole lot. So you can still use skills you've picked up in maybe other industries or other positions, and you can highlight those and showcase yourself as a candidate that way, but also showing that you still do have some related experience. I think the importance for a hybrid resume is the formatting and making sure that you keep it organized and you keep it clean, and you make it so that the host employer can still find the important information, that the summary is still there, the education is still there, your contact information is still there. This is a good example where it's separated with the skills on the top and the chronological on the bottom. You could do it in two different columns, but it's just very important if you're going to use a hybrid resume to keep it organized. So speaking of formatting, there are some tips we want to share about resume formats that maybe you've seen before, or maybe you've heard, but we want to reinforce. You should keep your resume concise. If you think about your resume, or you think about your LinkedIn profile, your resume is a scaled down version of that. So your LinkedIn profile might have all of your history, all of the skills that you've done, or all the skills that you have, all of the work experience that you've done, but your resume is going to cut out some of that noise and make sure that it's just the important components of your experience and your education. Aesthetics are very important for a resume, so leave some white space. Make sure it doesn't seem overwhelming. It's not like opening up a textbook. You don't want the reviewer to be overwhelmed. You want them to be able to find the important details. You want it to be easy to read. And to that note, make sure you use a clear font size and a clear format. So you're keeping it in a way where the reviewer, they expect to find the information where the information actually is. I wouldn't use any pictures or any shapes. And that's one, because we talked about pictures being something that you typically don't put on a resume in the United States, but also any pictures or shapes could mess up the screening software. If your resume is actually going to a computer screener before a human screener, it might parse the information incorrectly, and your resume might get rejected before it even is looked at by human eyes. It's also important for that reason to make sure that the contact detail, all of the information is consistent. The same titles, same dates, same job responsibilities that you do have. So keep that consistent across your resume, across your cover letter, across your LinkedIn profile, and be careful of any acronyms as well. Make sure that if there is anything that's not industry specific, if it's an acronym, spell it out. Make sure that the reviewer or the screening software can understand what it is that you're referencing on your resume. We've talked about this before and seen it in some of the examples, but keep your contact details at the top of the resume. Make sure they're very easy to find. Make sure they're contact details that you respond to. Don't put a phone number that you don't answer. Don't put an email address that you don't look at. I think that's really important to make sure that you have, first and foremost, how the host employer can reach you. You might want to include your website if you're in the design field and you have a website, or if there's an online portfolio that you maintain. If not, I think in some of the examples we saw LinkedIn profile links. That's another great thing you can add to your resume. And I would also encourage your format to keep it at 1 page maximum if you're early in your career. Like I said, at a certain point, 2 pages might make sense, but probably not until you have more than 10 years of experience. So if you're just starting out in your professional career, 1 page maximum is really what you should be doing for your resume format. Okay, so resume content. My initial tip here is to have a general resume template that you use, and maybe that template is longer than a page, maybe it's 2 pages, but take that template and update it for every job you apply to. And you can remove some of the bullets that don't make sense so you can consolidate down to one page. You can craft those bullets to what the internship posting is actually asking for. So you might want to use synonyms, you might want to tweak your past experience, and maybe even your summary, and you want to mirror what the position is actually asking for. So look at the key skills section, look at the job aspects that appear multiple times, maybe any preferred qualifications, those type of things in the internship posting are important to note because it shows that you understand the facets of the internship and you're going to be a good fit. You know what they're looking for. So your resume doesn't need to include everything that you've ever done. I think probably 6 to 8 bullets maximum per past experience. Anything more than that, again, gets daunting. It's harder for a reviewer to read. There's probably more things that you have that you can certainly talk about in an interview, but for each experience section, on the absolute high side, I think 6 to 8 bullet points maximum. And these should be what you achieved in the position, not necessarily what your assigned role was. So again, you want to quantify what you did in your role as a manager, or what your role, what you did that you have leadership skills. Make sure you're focusing on how you were able to thrive in that position, not just that you did that position. We talked about this earlier, but make sure that you do update quarterly and constantly, not just when you're looking for a new position. It might be a good idea to task yourself in your calendar every 3 or 4 months to update your resume, or do so anytime you have wins at school. If you have a successful project, or something happens that's a professional success at school or post-graduation, update that on your resume so that you think of it in the moment and you're not trying to recreate the wheel every time you're applying for a new position. We often get this question from potential interns and trainees about resumes. If they have a LinkedIn profile, why do they also need a resume? So a resume is tactile, and it's something that you, before coronavirus, would print out and you could hand to someone. Now, you probably would email it to someone, but it's used for informational interviews, for networking, like we talked about before, and it focuses on the skills and experience that you have, where your LinkedIn profile is going to be more expansive, and it's going to include non-relevant experience, maybe non-relevant skills, industry groups and hobbies, and those are great, and it's a great second way for someone to learn about you as a person. But if a hiring manager is looking at the job that they're hiring for, they're going to want to see skills that relate to that, and you don't want all of these other things to crowd out the important parts of you as a candidate. So your LinkedIn profile is great, but your resume is going to be more tailored to what you're applying for. And remember that LinkedIn is still a social media platform, so be careful what you post and what you're sharing. If you wouldn't be comfortable sharing or discussing that topic in a job interview, it probably doesn't make sense to have it on your LinkedIn profile. So before we break for another round of any questions that have come in, I do want to talk about application screening systems. Bigger companies do use these systems just to manage the volume of resumes that come in. And these screening softwares, they parse for specific information in the skills section, in the education, in your experience, and they're looking for keywords. They're looking for the keywords that I mentioned earlier that are used in the position title, in the description, maybe any words that are used more than twice, any successful criteria for the position. So you should use those specific phrases where appropriate instead of synonyms. You want to mirror what the job or internship posting is posting for, because that's all the screening system knows to look for. So other keywords might be competing industries or brands, or any notable industry associations or qualifications. Those are the same keywords you're going to want to use for humanized, but the screening system, again, doesn't know what that acronym might stand for. So you might really want to spell things out and dumb it down for the robots in case they are using a screening system. So our tips here for anytime you might be submitting an application to hiring at whatever the company is, and knowing that it might go to a screening system, make sure that you match your resume to the job posting. use keywords, and then also use bullets. So paragraphs are going to be more difficult for a screening system to parse correctly where education ends and experience begins. So you're going to want to use bullets because that's going to show the system where to stop and where to start looking for a new batch of information. And eventually all of this is going to go to a human. So bullets are also easier on human eyes as well. So when you write your resume, make sure that you're writing it so a human understands too. You're not just filling it with buzzwords that you think the robot's going to want to see, because eventually a human is going to look at your resume as well. So with that, we're going to wrap up resumes and shift towards cover letters. And Fatima, are there any lingering questions we have on resumes before we transition over?
Yes, there's one question here that is asking if contact information is considered to be unnecessary personal information.
That's a good question. So your contact information is important to put on your resume because you need to be contacted if the company would like to move forward. But as an international intern or trainee, you might not want to put your address. You might just want to leave it at your LinkedIn profile or your email address, maybe not even your phone number. Probably you'd still want a phone number just in case, or again, a phone number, maybe like a WhatsApp, but any address forms probably not necessary, because it's very unlikely that the host company is going to mail you an invitation to move forward in the interview process. So I think you can leave out that type of contact information, but it's still important to have your email address there at minimum so that you can be reached and the company knows how to get in touch with you. So with that, we'll start talking about cover letters. So before we begin, I wanted to highlight one of, or probably four of the most common questions we see about cover letters, or that you might be asking yourself right now. A, what is a cover letter? B, why is it important? C, is it required? And the last one, does anyone read a cover letter? Not many people or not many organizations give feedback on cover letters, so it might feel like no one reads them anyway. So to answer these questions one by one, cover letter is your first impression to a company. You submit it with your resume. It's the first time you can really articulate yourself as a person. Your resume talks about you as a candidate and your skills, but your cover letter gives you a chance to talk about yourself and your interests in the role. You can align the role with your skills in a bit more depth than you could on a resume. You can provide a personality along with your application. You can even demonstrate likability and a cultural fit within the organization. So you don't simply repurpose the lines that you've put on your resume. You're going to present yourself in a bit of a different way in a cover letter. It's important because it's a quick way to introduce yourself to the employer and to give them a taste of your personality. And it's not just your skills that you're sharing, because all of that's in your resume. So it lets whoever is reading know exactly why you're sending them your resume, why you're interested in them, and why you'd like to intern or train with them as an organization. As far as being required, it's not required by every company, but it is a best practice. And I would encourage writing a cover letter, even if it's not required or if it's not specifically mentioned in the job posting. It is more work, but it's important to do. And it also is helpful for you to think about, why am I applying for this internship? Why do I think I'm a good fit? Is this really an organization that I would like to train with? So it helps, I think, reflectively to think about these different opportunities, even if it's not something that's required. And it is going to make you stand out as a candidate if you've gone to the extra work of writing a cover letter where no one else has. And the last question about, does anyone read a cover letter? And the answer is yes. Hiring managers do read cover letters, and sometimes they do read them even before they look at your resume, because they want to see who is detail oriented. If it's a job that includes extensive writing, cover letter is a great example of a writing sample that they can use. It lets the host employer see how a candidate presents themselves. So it can be hard to stay motivated to write cover letters if you're not receiving feedback on them, that it's being read, or what hiring managers liked or what they didn't like. And that's the unfortunate reality for cover letters, that you don't know what or who is reading them. But companies do read cover letters, and they are an important component of any job or internship or trainee application that you do submit. So with that, we wanted to provide some tips on writing cover letters. And similar to resumes, we'll start with the format. So you should address your cover letter to the hiring manager. If it's not apparent in the job posting or the internship posting, do a little research on the company, see if you can find out who the hiring manager is. It goes a long way, and it shows that you've looked into this company. You're not just submitting a template cover letter. You have done research, and you've thoughtfully explored why this is a good fit for you. I can't stress enough about proofreading your cover letter. It shows that you're detail oriented. Well, if there are any mistakes, it shows you're not detail oriented. But you don't want to submit a cover letter with any errors. You want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, and you're showing the most important skills that you have as a candidate, and those aren't being disrupted by typos. A cover letter only needs to be 3 or 4 paragraphs, so it isn't too detailed. It doesn't need to be extensive. First paragraph is an introduction, and then 1 to 2 paragraphs about the content and you as a candidate, and then a simple wrap up at the end. So your cover letter can really be pretty simple. It's professional. It's just like writing a news story and writing an introduction to yourself, and getting the hiring manager excited to bring you in and to meet you in person and to interview you. So keep it professional, but also keep it honest, because if you write things or you exaggerate things in your cover letter that aren't true, like that's going to come out in the interview. So you want to make sure that you're not exaggerating, you're not putting anything in your cover letter that might sound great, but that might not actually be true, because that won't look good on you as a candidate if that comes out in the future. So you can put a little bit more of your personality in a cover letter that might not be on your resume. You can show your passion for interning at that company or that position specifically, maybe any personal history you have that connects you with the company as well. You can include that in your resume. It's okay to put a little bit more color. Don't put so much that you're distracting from, again, the job or the internship itself, but you can put more color into your cover letter for sure. You don't need to go into salary discussion. You shouldn't go into salary discussion in your cover letter. You should not talk about even the J1 visa or any logistics. I think all of those details are important to talk about with a host employer for sure, but not at the beginning. In the cover letter, it's an introduction, so you don't need to talk about salary and benefits and visa status and stuff like that, because those are all things that'll come later in the process. So I want to go through each of the paragraphs or sections of a cover letter that we discussed and just pull them apart in a little bit more detail. So the introduction, like I said, it's kind of like a news story. Start with a strong lead, make sure you have a hook that is going to get the host employer interested. Tell them quickly about yourself and what drew you to the organization, why you're writing to them. So you can include information here about your area of expertise and your career goals, but in a preview or in a quick way. You'll talk more about some of those in the bulk part. But basically in the introduction, you're differentiating your application from the tons of other cover letters, and you're providing some personality and some interview fodder. So when you are called in, the host employer can kind of get a sense of your personality, and they have things to talk to you about, maybe some past projects that are related that are really exciting, that they want to learn more about you. So you're kind of giving them a bit of a cheat sheet in your introduction about you as a candidate. And then you'll move into the bigger section. So the content is the bulk of your cover letter. This is 1 to 2 paragraphs, and this is going to focus more on the skills and knowledge that you have and how it relates to this position. So why they should bring you in and the skills, knowledge, abilities you have as it matches what they're looking for. And this is going to be apparent in this section that you've done your homework and that you've looked into the company and you know what they're looking for. Maybe you might want to reference some important current events related to this company or some history that is going to be relevant to the skills that you have. You're focusing on what you bring to the table with the employer's needs in mind. So you might have all of these great skills, but does that match what the company is looking for? And the way to do that is to do some research on the company and focus on their needs within your cover letter and how you fit well with those needs. Similar to a resume, use keywords from the job description that was posted, those important key skills, those phrases that they reference a couple times. Those are the things that you want to put on the content section of your cover letter. You want to make sure that you're driving home that you have the tangible skills that they're looking for, and include any relevant anecdotes to back that up. Keep the story short, but if you have anecdotes and experience that relates well, make sure that you do include that in your cover letter. And anything else that is important that maybe you couldn't figure out a way to put on your resume, maybe you were running out of space or something that you do really want to highlight that doesn't come out great in bullet form and you needed a few sentences to describe, you can put that in the content section of your cover letter as well. Remember that it's only 3 or 4 paragraphs though, so don't make your cover letter too long that those important things similar to your resume are going to be drowned out by additional noise. So the last paragraph is the wrap-up section. So tie it all together at the end, a summary and conclusion of 1 sentence of why you're the best fit. And the rest of this paragraph you can probably use as a template for most cover letters, thanking them for their consideration, showing that you're excited for the position. No hard sells at the end by saying I'll call you next week to set up an interview. Let the host employer make that decision, but be grateful for the time and also ask them for an interview. Ask them if they, when could you come in? You'd be excited to come in and talk to them in person about this opportunity. So make sure that you do actually ask for an interview in your cover letter, but you're not going to tell them that you'll call or you're not going to demand it. Be grateful for their time and that they've looked through your entire application, your resume, your cover letter to decide if they would like to move forward with you as a candidate. So that is the cover letter format that is 99% of cover letters. Most will follow that simple formula, but there are alternate versions of cover letters. And again, like alternate versions of resumes, this isn't going to apply for everyone, but it's important to know that there are other formats that you can do for a cover letter, and they do exist, and they're pretty easy to put together as well. So we have the employer needs and the hybrid are the 2 other versions. The employer needs is typically used for higher level applicants, specialists, and executives, but it could be also very useful if you're proposing an internship to a company. The hybrid is for anyone who has some gaps in their experience, maybe a transition between careers, or any relevant experience that may not be on the resume. You can kind of use these 2 interchangeably. You could use an employer needs versus a hybrid, depending again on how developed you are in your career, how many of your skills do relate. But the difference between these 2 versions and a paragraph format is an employer needs is pretty much 2 columns, and it has the employer needs, like the skills, the abilities, the experience that the employer is looking for, and just highlights short anecdotes of why you have those experience, what you've done that fits into that role seamlessly. So if you're proposing an internship, if you think that you know what the employer is looking for, you can list those needs and you can talk about yourself as a candidate and why you have all those skills and why you'd be a seamless fit into the organization. A hybrid version of a cover letter still includes the summary and a bit of the content sections we talked about, but not nearly in as much paragraph form. You would still focus on those skills, but kind of sandwich it around a summary. I'm sorry, around an introduction and around some of the skills, and then follow it with a summary at the end. So a hybrid is just like a hybrid resume. It's a little bit of an employer needs format and a little bit of a paragraph format. But like resumes, there's different versions of doing it. There's, I'm sure, even alternate versions besides these three. So in different industries, you might use different versions. You might even want to sample some of your work and include that in some cover letters. I don't mean to say that these three are the only possible ways you could do a cover letter, but they're certainly the most common in the United States. Just like resumes, cover letters do have or some companies do use applicant screening systems when they are looking through the cover letters that they've received. So these screening systems are also parsing for the relevant keywords in a job posting. So just same advice here as with resumes. Make sure you're using the appropriate keywords. Make sure you're using the appropriate file types. You can also do a bit of research to see if there is a human or computer screener by seeing how many people work in their recruiting department, or if it's going to someone's name at the company, then you know it's probably going to a human screener before it's going to an applicant screening software. So you can maybe do a little bit of research on the company first. You should be doing a little bit of research on the company first, but you can do a bit of research into the recruiting to see if you should craft your letter with a computer screening system in mind or with a person screening in mind for the first barrier that you might reach when you're submitting your application. So with that, I want to conclude the section about cover letters, and we'll do a wrap up on resumes and cover letters, unless any questions have come in about cover letters. Fatima, have we received any about cover letters?
Yes, there's two questions here. The first question is, can the cover letter include gender, religion, or other personal information? And how long should a cover letter be in length?
So the cover letter, similar to a resume, should not include any personal information that doesn't really apply to the position. So while I said you can add on a little bit more personality to a cover letter, you still don't want to include anything that is totally irrelevant and could put the host company in an awkward position if they're not able to offer you a position and be charged with discrimination or something like that. So you still want to be careful about how much you're putting in a cover letter. You can put in kind of your personality, but not necessarily your personal information. And a cover letter length, I would say, is still under 1 page. It's 3 or 4 paragraphs. So it really doesn't need to be that long. So it is still pretty concise. You're not writing them a manuscript that's going to be very lengthy. It's basically just a 1-page letter that you're providing that's explaining who you are and why you're applying. So it doesn't need to be extremely detailed. Okay, so we'll do a wrap-up slide, and if there are any other questions, please type them into the chat box now. But hopefully we've answered some of the biggest questions, and I put them up here in advance of the presentation, assuming that they would be kind of the biggest questions, and we hope we've answered the difference between a resume and a cover letter, whether or not you need to do either or both. I think we've touched on whether or not your LinkedIn is enough. And then lastly, if you have a portfolio, do you need a resume, a cover letter, and a portfolio? So in conclusion, a resume is an outline of you as a professional. It says why the company might find you as a good candidate, where a cover letter is a tailored letter that you submit with your resume that says why you're applying for the position. So those are the two differences. You should do both. So while a resume is giving a snapshot of you and you whether or not you meet the requirements of the position, the cover letter gives you that chance to express not only do you meet the requirements, but you'd also be a good fit for the team. So definitely you want both sides of that coin to be presented to a host employer. As far as LinkedIn, your LinkedIn is probably about 75% of the work right there. You have it online, you just need to reformat it a little bit. You still do need a resume unless the job says just to send a LinkedIn profile, and few jobs do that, but it does exist. But your resume, again, it highlights the skills you have that are relevant to the position while canceling out any of the additional information and making it very easy for a host employer to focus on the important stuff. So in some fields, you might already have a portfolio, and if that's the case, you should submit your resume, you should submit your cover letter, and you should submit some samples of your work as they might relate. You could also include links to your website if you have all that online, but the important details about you that speak to you as a candidate that you want the host employer to know, you should submit that. So in some cases, you might need to do a resume, a cover letter, and a sample of your portfolio work as well. So with that, if there are any lingering questions, I'm happy to answer them now, but that does conclude our presentation. We are doing another webinar next week. I believe the date is July 29th. Fatima, correct me if that's wrong, but that will be a webinar on interview tips and things to consider once you get past the resume and cover letter stage and you're working on interviewing for an internship position. So same time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, July 29th. So with that, unless there's any other questions, we'll end the presentation here.
There is one last question that came in.
Okay, great.
If you mentioned making a longer template for resumes that you can shorten for each job you can apply to, can you also do this for cover letters?
I think you can, for the most part, do it for cover letters. You can make a longer template that you draw specific sentences from, maybe specific anecdotes from, and you can compile a cover letter that has all of these different elements. I think that's fine to do. Make sure that you're still doing the same level of research and thoughtfulness on why you are actually applying for the position. And there might be specific elements of a cover letter, specific stories or experiences you want to draw from that might only be for one specific company where it makes sense to talk about that because you live in the neighborhood or you visited when you were a child or something like that. So I think it's okay to have similar parts that you reuse for a cover letter, especially in that last wrap-up paragraph, and you can have longer elements that you do pull in. But again, a resume is a cover letter is a little bit more specific to each company. So you don't want to go overboard and just have a template cover letter and start sending that out to companies because that's not going to get you very far. Excellent. So we just have that one question, then we will end it there. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to working with you as you start your application to intern or train in the US.